The card beeped once, then again, declined. In the middle of a crowded supermarket, a billionaire stood frozen while the cashier laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. Try again, unless you just don't have the money. A few people smirked, others stared. No one stepped in. Beside the cart, a tired black mother felt that familiar burn of judgment, but stayed silent. And just a few steps away, Aaliyah watched it all, small hands clenched, eyes locked on the humiliation unfolding. His name was Richard, and no one realized this moment would expose a mistake they could never undo. Comment and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe for stories that demand to be heard. For Richard, moments like this weren't supposed to exist. His life usually moved through private offices, guarded entrances, and rooms where power worked quietly in his favor. He was used to being recognized without having to explain himself. Standing in a grocery store line, surrounded by strangers who saw only a man with a declined card, felt unfamiliar and unsettling. A few steps away, Monique kept her focus on the cart in front of her. Grocery trips were never casual. Every item had been chosen with intention, every dollar already accounted for. She had learned how to move through public spaces without drawing attention, how to stay composed even when judgment lingered in the air. That familiar weight pressed down, again, subtle, practiced, exhausting. Beside her stood Aaliyah, quiet and alert. She noticed the way adults leaned forward when embarrassment became entertainment. She noticed the pause between sounds, the way voices sharpened. Aaliyah didn't fully understand money or status, but she understood tone. She understood unfairness. And she could feel something tightening in the room before anyone named it. The store itself offered no refuge. Bright lights buzzed overhead. Cameras watched from above, present but detached. Behind the register, the cashier moved with routine impatience, authority built on rules, not compassion. Every scan felt rushed. Every pause felt like an inconvenience. Nearby, the manager stood back with his arms folded. He knew how moments like this usually went. Keep things moving, avoid scenes, follow policy. Stepping in only created problems. Silence was easier. Silence was safer. Someone in line shifted closer. The man behind them didn't hide his interest. Curiosity mixed with satisfaction as he leaned forward, a quiet chuckle slipping out. Discomfort had turned into spectacle, and no one rushed to stop it. Further back, a woman near the end of the line watched without speaking. She recognized the pattern, the pause, the stares, the unspoken agreement to let humiliation happen. Her jaw tightened, but she stayed where she was. Experience had taught her how these moments usually ended. Nothing about this felt random. The air wasn't settling, it was charging. Every glance, every silence pulled the moment tighter, and whatever came next wasn't going to fade quietly. The silence after the decline didn't soften the moment. It sharpened it. The cashier's fingers hovered over the register longer than necessary, movements slowed just enough to feel deliberate. People in line shifted closer, curiosity turning into appetite. Richard felt eyes pressing in from every direction, a tension that stripped context and reduced everything to a single failure. He tried to steady himself, cleared his throat, offered a calm explanation that went nowhere. Richard had fixed bigger problems with fewer words, but here, language felt useless. The register didn't care who he was, neither did the room. He reached for his wallet again, not because he believed it would work, but because stopping felt like surrender. Behind him, Gary leaned forward, interest curdling into satisfaction. Guess money doesn't talk today, huh? A few quiet laughs followed. No one challenged it. The manager noticed the tension but didn't move. His eyes flicked from the line to the register, weighing inconvenience against involvement. Policy over people. Movement over fairness. If no one complained loudly enough, nothing had to change. Monique felt the moment tipping from awkward into cruel. She recognized the pattern instantly. The pause before judgment turned official. She'd heard that tone before, seen that look aimed at her, at people who looked like her. The cashier's voice wasn't new, it was familiar. Survival whispered for silence. Dignity pulled the other way. The cashier exhaled sharply and tapped the screen. If you can't pay, you need to step aside. You're holding everyone up. The words landed publicly, framed as efficiency but soaked in judgment. The humiliation was no longer accidental, it was procedural. Bright lights made everything feel exposed. Cameras watched without blinking. They recorded everything and corrected nothing. A phone lifted somewhere in line. Someone whispered, The energy shifted from curiosity to spectacle. Denise, near the back, saw it clearly. The instant a crowd decided it was safe to enjoy someone else's discomfort, her jaw tightened. She stayed where she was. Experience had taught her how dangerous it could be to stand out alone. Aaliyah watched the adults carefully. She noticed how her mother's shoulders pulled inward, how Richard's hands trembled just slightly as he gathered items that hadn't been bagged. She didn't understand banks or cards, but she understood tone. She understood when voices hardened and when people decided someone deserved what was happening to them. Richard tried again, softer now. Not defensive, just human. There has to be a mistake. I can fix this. The cashier didn't look up. The response came from the manager, measured and cold. Store policy is clear. If payment fails, the transaction ends. The sentence closed the door without raising its voice. Authority hid inside procedure and felt untouchable. Gary smirked, enjoying the shift from person to process. Richard felt something give way, not panic, but disbelief. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about permission. Permission to dismiss. Permission to humiliate. Monique swallowed hard. She felt the familiar battle between protecting her child and protecting her dignity. Speaking up carried risks she knew too well. Staying silent carried a different cost. She met Aaliyah's eyes, hoping calm would anchor her, hoping quiet would be enough. But Aaliyah wasn't calm. She was absorbing everything, the laughter, the pauses, the way authority moved around fairness instead of toward it. She watched Richard step back, boxed in by expectations he couldn't meet in that moment. She watched adults decide the scene was finished. The cashier sighed, impatience sharpening into irritation. "Sir, step aside. We have paying customers waiting." The line tightened. The air felt thick, charged with something unfinished. No one noticed how close the moment was to breaking. How the pressure building inside one small observer was reaching a point that wouldn't hold much longer. The humiliation hadn't peaked yet. It was still rising. The moment stretched longer than it should have. The line had stopped moving. A cartwheel squeaked, then went still. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade, as if the store itself sensed something was about to break. Aaliyah took one small step forward. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was enough to pull the room's attention away from the register and toward her. Monique felt it instantly. The shift in the air, the way eyes turned, the way her daughter's presence suddenly felt exposed. Her first instinct was to reach out, to pull Aaliyah back, to shield her from becoming part of whatever this had turned into. But Aaliyah's body was already moving with a quiet certainty Monique had never seen before. Aaliyah reached into her pocket slowly, not out of confusion, not out of fear, with intention. Her fingers closed around a few crumpled bills and loose coins. She counted them carefully, lips pressed together, brows drawn tight with focus. The sound of the money brushing against itself felt louder than it should have. Somewhere in the line, a phone that had been half raised slowly lowered again. No one pressed record. Richard noticed her movement and froze. His embarrassment had already hollowed him out, but now, something sharper cut through it. Panic. This wasn't supposed to involve a child. His head shook before he realized it was happening. "You don't have to do that." Aaliyah didn't look at him. She walked up to the counter, standing just tall enough to place the money down. The coins touched the surface with a soft, final sound that cut through the room. For the first time since the decline, the cashier looked directly at what was happening. Aaliyah's voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "This is all I have, but it's enough to help." The sentence landed harder than shouting ever could. The room froze. No laughter, no whispers, no movement. Monique's chest tightened as pride and fear collided inside her. She saw how early her daughter had learned something adults kept avoiding, that unfairness didn't need volume to be real. Children like hers were pushed into moments that demanded courage long before they should have been. Monique stayed still, knowing that stepping in now would take something away from what Aaliyah had already claimed. The cashier's confidence cracked. The practiced impatience drained from her face, replaced by uncertainty. She glanced at the money, then at the people watching her. For the first time, the rules didn't feel like protection. They felt thin. The manager shifted his stance. The authority he'd hidden behind suddenly felt fragile, exposed under the weight of too many eyes. His voice came out tighter than he intended. "This is inappropriate. She's a child. The words didn't restore order. They revealed guilt. Richard felt his chest tighten as the meaning of the moment finally settled on him. He looked at the small pile of money on the counter, then at Aaliyah's hands. His throat burned. The power he'd lost earlier didn't matter anymore. Something deeper had collapsed. I've never felt smaller than I do right now. Gary didn't smirk, didn't speak. The woman near the back of the line didn't look away this time. The crowd that had leaned in now leaned back, confronted with itself. Humiliation had changed direction. Aaliyah turned slightly and looked at her mother. There was no fear in her eyes, no doubt, just clarity. Mama, it's not right to let them do this. The words weren't an accusation. They were a truth no one could unhear. The cashier stepped back from the register. The manager said nothing. Whatever authority had existed moments earlier dissolved in the open space Aaliyah had created. A child with almost nothing had forced a room full of adults to see exactly who they had been choosing to be. The balance had shifted. Not because of money, not because of status, but because someone small enough to ignore had refused to look away. And there was no going back from that. The moment didn't snap back to normal. It couldn't. The cashier stepped away from the register first, her movements stiff, uncertain. The tone she carried moments earlier was gone, replaced by silence she didn't know how to fill. The manager cleared his throat, avoiding the crowd's eyes, then quietly signaled for the transaction to be voided. The groceries were moved aside, not as a favor, but as an acknowledgement that something had gone wrong in front of too many witnesses to ignore. Richard stood still, longer than necessary. The embarrassment he'd felt earlier no longer defined the moment. What stayed with him was the weight of what a child had revealed, not about money, but about character. He didn't reach for his wallet again. He didn't try to reclaim authority. Instead, he turned to Monique and Aaliyah with a respect that hadn't existed before, the kind that didn't ask for forgiveness or offer spectacle, just recognition. Monique felt it immediately. The room no longer looked through her. No one rushed her. No one spoke over her. For the first time since stepping into that line, she wasn't bracing herself. She was standing exactly where she belonged. And beside her, Aaliyah remained calm, not triumphant, not shaken, just steady. She hadn't acted to be praised. She had acted because staying silent hadn't felt right. People in line shifted uncomfortably. Phones stayed down. Eyes dropped. The crowd that had fed on humiliation now carried it quietly for themselves. Whatever laughter had existed earlier never returned. The store moved on, but not unchanged, because moments like this don't end at the register. They follow people home. They settle into memory. They ask questions that don't fade easily. How often does silence protect harm? How often do children see what adults choose to ignore? And how many moments like this pass quietly, only because no one small enough, brave enough, steps forward? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more stories about truth, dignity, and the fight to be seen. And hit like. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.